First question, it's a difficult one. What makes a great fashion photograph?
Yeah, it's tricky. I guess a good fashion photo should probably feel quite timeless, and maybe it can kind of live and breathe outside the context of fashion in a way. So it doesn't necessarily need the context of a fashion shoot to feel like a great photograph.
A lot of the stuff that's written about your photographs is that they're sort of real or raw in some way. Often you shoot people in sort of everyday settings, or you go and find people, you know, in their hometowns or what have you. But I was interested in how you use the fashion, because actually the clothing often doesn't look that real. Often they look like they're wearing a costume.
Yeah.
And I was interested in how you see fashion and why you work in that way.
To begin with, I did spend an awful lot of time going to places and spending time in places and taking portraits of people just as they were, and I appreciated, you know, an interesting haircut or you know, the way that they stood or anything like that. But then once I started doing fashion, and I did a shoot for Man About Town with Benjamin Bruno, and it always stood out as a sort of moment for me of understanding how interesting fashion could be, because, you know, it was fantastic to, you know, basically we took a bag of clothes to Newcastle, and you know, it was just me and Ben, and as we found people, we dressed them, and it was interesting because I would see someone that visually just stood out to me as they were, but then, you know, Ben might, you know, there's a picture of a kid that we dressed in a blue, I think it was a Calvin Klein suit, and it was a fantastic moment where I realised you could take someone that's already quite interesting and then elevate their character to something that you might not even be able to imagine to begin with. So that always stood out as a moment where I kind of understood the potential of what fashion can bring to a person, I guess.
Do you come from a creative family?
There wasn't a lot of art books around, or, you know, we didn't go to galleries and shows and stuff like that, and I didn't really like art at school at all. I didn't quite understand what was the point of it was. I think I was quite academic in a way, as in I tried quite hard in, you know, biology and, you know, stuff like that.
Were you popular?
I used to be called Big Ears a lot.
Oh no!
Yeah,
Jamie,
they kind of, they're always the same size as now, so if you imagine my head much smaller. So yeah, but then once my head grew a bit bigger, they were normal, so then I stopped being called Big Ears and I got along with people, I think.
You studied forensic sciences when you went to university, so when you were like, you know, pre-university, when you were getting to that age where you're thinking about a job, imagine taking pictures wasn't something you thought about.
I wanted to be a geography teacher for a long time, and then from there I then got really interested in science, and that led to forensic science.
So would you say you were aesthetically minded at all? Like, were you interested in what you wore? Did you look at pictures ever? Like, were you intrigued? Because you seem so intrigued by people now. Like, did you look at people? And
No, not at all. It was never no. I sometimes think back, like, what was I thinking? Like, what did I spend my days thinking about? Because now I am a photographer and I spend an awful lot of time thinking about photography and art and stuff like that and appreciating it. I kind of think, what the hell was I thinking? What was I spent my time thinking about? But it was just never that at all. When photography did come around, and, you know, when I swapped to photography after kind of discovering it in forensic science, that I very quickly kind of fell in love. I really, really enjoyed taking photographs, so I always felt quite guilty when I wasn't taking pictures, as in I kind of I found something that I really love doing, so I'm going to spend every second that I possibly can doing it. So the most accessible thing to do would be to go outside and take photographs, you know. It's different if you need to book a studio or you want to go to the college studio to use the equipment. That takes a lot of time, you know, like booking stuff in or whatever. So the way that getting outside and photographing people and photographing places, what I always felt was the best possible way to use my time, now that I've found something I really love doing. When you go into all the mock crime scene houses and gather evidence, you would then just document it with a camera. So it was digital and it was very basic, but it was like, oh, this is an interesting way to use photography, rather than, say, taking a picture of I don't know, your mate at the bowling alley or something. So it was like it was a brand new way of seeing, you know, the way that photography was used, and I liked using my hands and using my hands with an object to then make something else. I quit the forensics course and I run the photography course at Preston. I don't know why I did that, in that I could have probably tried to call any, but I guess it was so unfamiliar that I kind of just went with what seemed the most simplest route. So I called the university and I spoke to a guy called John Aiken, who's the head of the course, and he said, "Do you have a portfolio?" And I said, "No, I don't have anything." And he said, "Well, spend the next 2-3 weeks building a portfolio of things that you like and people that you love," you know, is what he said, and come up for an interview. So that's what I did.
What did you take pictures of?
I photographed my nan, my skateboard, some graffiti.
So you were into skateboarding then?
Yeah.
Were you good?
No, not at all.
It's interesting though that you took pictures of your nan and your skateboard, and just these kind of, like, it's kind of similar to how you take pictures today, I think. It's like...
Not if you saw them, but I guess in a way it was stuff that was around.
Yeah.
And I had this digital camera that had about 1 million different settings, so I didn't know what the hell I was doing really. But I think what really stood out for the course was that I came across a book. I think my friend gave it to me. I can't quite remember. It was called Shots from the Hip by a guy called Johnny Stiletto.
Yeah.
And he basically travelled. I mean, it was a little bit. I guess he was kind of doing what Walker Evans did, in the sense that he was shooting from his hip on trains. So when I went for the interview, I kind of banged on about how interesting I thought this book was, and they let me start in the second year of the course.
And what point did you realise you were good? And what point did anyone else realise you were good?
I don't know about realising I was good, but I realised I realised I found something that I loved, which is half the battle, I think. You know, because I couldn't stop myself from talking about it, from thinking about it, from, you know, doing it. So I knew that it was I found something that I'd loved. So
when you talk about your upbringing, it sounds like you were quite relaxed, and, you know, you were almost not particularly passionate. And would you say it brought out a slight obsessive side in you, or an intensity that maybe?
No, definitely, yeah.
And would you say you're ambitious? Do you look at, actually this is interesting, like, who do you think your peers are right now, and do you look at them and?
I mean, I'd like to say I don't, but of course, as in I try, you know, it's so easy to kind of get wrapped up in what other people do and what they're doing, and, you know, I think that's just a natural human thing, I guess, I don't know. So I would like to say that I don't, but I kind of do, and naturally there is a competitiveness, because of, if you respect a magazine, then you look at the photographers that work in that magazine, and then you kind of want to strive to do work. So I guess in that respect, most definitely, I guess.
You mentioned Shots from the Hip, but when you started studying photography, is that when you came across people who, I know that Nigel Shaffron's someone you've greatly admired, were there other photographers that you came across who really were quite formative for you when you saw their work?
I mean, it's so hard to say.
There's so
it's
many.
like, who's your favourite singer album? I don't know.
Yeah.
But Nigel was a guy that particularly, you know, and I said earlier to you that I remember calling him up when I was at uni to try and assist him. I called a wall photographer, an Irish guy, I've forgotten his name now, but I tried to call a lot of documentary photographers at the time, and nobody needed assistance. You know, Nigel pretty much hung up on me. So then I spoke to Adam, who was my tutor, who you know, and he recommended that I kind of, you know, looked at fashion photographers because they need assistance.
Do you ever wish you were a documentary photographer?
I think I am still. I always struggle with the idea of, like, okay, well, I'm not me personally, but when you're doing work and you're like, well, this is fashion, this is documentary, this is personal. I never understood that. I always think it's just photography because it's all very personal. You know, I remember when I was at uni, and once I graduated, again, I was approaching a lot of photographers to assist them. I always found it quite weird that their work was, you know, you'd go on their website, and, you know, not everyone, but some people, you would go and they'd be like, well, this is the personal section, and then this is fashion. And I always really struggled with that. I didn't understand why you would do work that looked different because the context is slightly different.
Knowing you as a person, I can't, and I've always thought this about you, I can't imagine you going up to someone and asking to take their picture.
Really?
You're quite shy sometimes. How do you do it?
I just ask to take their portrait.
And they never say no?
Yeah, no, of course, all the time. But I mean, because I spent so much time doing it in Preston, for example, that I learned very quickly how to, how you can conduct yourself when you, because it is incredibly scary to do. If you're going up to a stranger, your kind of heart is pounding, even now, because it's, you don't know what they're going to say. So I quickly realised that, for example, if I'd go up to a kid in the bus station or whatever, I wouldn't kind of say, God, you look fantastic, can I take your picture? It would more be like, oh, I really like your haircut, or I really like your jacket that you're wearing, can I take a quick portrait? Because I'm doing a project on the bus station. So I kind of learned quite quick. But funnily enough, I learned quite quickly what to say and not to say, but I never thought about that actually probably the way that I am and the way that I, not necessarily the way that I talk, but the way that I sort of conduct myself affects the photo massively.
Did you ever worry about drifting into the world of kind of constructed reality, where you were almost trying to make a picture with a big model look like a picture that you'd taken in a bus station or a living room or something?
Yeah, I mean, ironically, I did a story in a bus station on models, but of course there is a fine line, and if it does drift to that side of things, then I think you're kind of in trouble. I almost think you have to go a million miles away from what it is that and it sort of comes back. If a model's standing there in a funny dress, in Comme des Garçons, not that Comme des Garçons is funny, but in the sense of it being, bad choice of words there, but I guess it's the most unfamiliar sense of fashion,
Yeah. You can say funny, it's fine. Comme des Garçons is funny.
Yeah, but I did a project with Marie-Amélie, and we shot I think it was Natalie Westling on the edge of a cliff in Comme des Garçons, and I love those photographs, and it's a million miles away from a kid wearing a tracksuit jacket in a bus station. So, and I feel they still feel very much in the same world as the kids in the bus station, but it's knowing and understanding that you have to go a million miles away to then come back.
Your style's very popular at the moment. Does it annoy you when people copy you?
And of course, like I said, you take so much time to build something that's yours, in a way. The way that you print is, I've spent so many hours printing and trying to build a palette that I think is interesting. And, for a long time, like when I was traveling around England and photographing kids and, not just kids actually, but all types of people, then a lot of places I went to were quite, I wouldn't say grimy, but they're very, very hard places. Not in a sense that someone's going to be killed or anything like that, but in it being very cold and the light was very dull. And so when I came to the darkroom to print them, I always wanted everything to have quite an optimism and like a celebration. So I felt that if I printed stuff on the warmer side, with a bit more yellow or whatever, it would bring optimism. So for a long time, I kept playing around with that, a lot of that kind of colour palette and that way of approaching things for a long time. So of course, if I do see where I'm like, that looks very similar to the way that I've printed something in the past, or it's like somehow. But I think that's the nature of that's the nature of this industry.
There are so many young people that really dream of being photographers and want to be photographers, and why you? Why do you think that people have responded so well to your work? Why have you made it and others try so hard to? Why do people like you, Jamie?
I don't know, really. I mean, I guess who's to say what doing well is and stuff? I guess because, a photographer that doesn't shoot for any magazine could be doing incredibly well in terms of how they feel about their own practice. I mean, I tell myself, I guess, that you're successful if you like your own work, and you feel like you're producing work that's strong and good, and you get yourself across in your work, and that's a success. But I actually think because of the nature of, like we were talking about things being competitive and all that kind of stuff, that I think a part of you naturally thinks, well, you know, if I do that, if I do this, or if I do that, then that makes me a success, which I think is a dangerous game in a way, because ultimately I think what you'll ultimately be happy with is, or you'll feel like a success when you really fully believe in what you're doing, not that you're in vogue.